Hey everybody. So eclipses we've already learnt a bit about. We know that an eclipse is where one object in space, it passes in front of another object and blocks it out from view. Either it completely blocks it out or it partially does. Well, there's actually two main types of eclipses, and they're solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. And we'll look at solar eclipses first. So here's a few pictures of a solar eclipse. You might have been lucky enough to see one if you've travelled around the world and been there at the right time. So they're amazing because the moon passes in front of the sun. Only a tiny bit of light can get past the moon. So you see this little ring of light and it turns the whole sky and the landscape this eerie red colour, like there's a bushfire around. Almost like it's nighttime. But then a few minutes later, the moon passes and suddenly it's daytime again. So if you can visit somewhere, if you can time your visit to go and see a solar eclipse, I really recommend it. They're amazing. Okay, well, a solar eclipse happens when the moon passes in front of the sun. It's the most simple definition. Okay, so like I said, for any eclipse, you can either have an object completely blocked from view or partially blocked from view. And so that's what these two pictures are showing here. These two are when the moon completely blocked out the sun, and these are called total eclipses. So the moon blocks the sun. But often, a lot of parts of the world will only see the eclipse as a partial eclipse, which is this one here. So you can see the outline of the moon here. This is as far as it goes to cover the sun. So it looks like a bit of a crescent shape, but it's a crescent sun instead of a moon. And these types of eclipses, they're just called partial eclipses. Where the moon's only partially blocking the sun. Okay. Well, what does it actually look like if we zoom out and have a look at how they all line up? So here's how solar eclipses happen. If the moon lines up perfectly with this, so that it's in between the Earth and the sun, then you can see here that there will be some shadows that the moon casts. And so if we're right in this middle region here, and at the moment this is only in the ocean, then if we're here and we're looking outwards, all we can see is the moon because it's completely covering the sun, even though the sun's so much bigger. If we're in any of these other regions here that's partially in shade, well, we can see a little bit of the sun, but it's going to be partially blocked, so they're getting a partial eclipse there. So this person's seeing a total eclipse and they're seeing a partial. Alright, well, the other type of eclipse, like I said, is a lunar eclipse. These ones are a bit more complicated. So lunar eclipses, this is when the moon goes behind the Earth and gets completely blocked out in shadow from the sun. So it passes behind Earth into Earth's shadow, and then that's how the moon gets blocked out. So once the moon passes into shadow, then it appears really dark during the lunar eclipse. So it gets really dark, and it even turns this blood red colour here. And you might have heard the phrase a blood moon before. And that's just another name for a lunar eclipse. Because the way that light travels through the Earth's atmosphere, some of the red light can actually bend around the Earth, and so the red light lights up the moon during the eclipse. So for a few minutes, suddenly the moon goes really dark, and then it becomes this weird red blood colour. Okay, so these eclipses are a lot more common than solar eclipses. And let's have a look why. So here's how it works. We've got the sun, we've got the Earth, and then there's a shadow behind the Earth because it's blocking out the sun's rays. And when the moon happens to pass exactly into the shadow, then everyone who's on the night side of Earth can see that lunar eclipse. So that's why lunar eclipses are more common, because everyone on that side of the Earth will see the blood moon. But remember, with solar eclipses, you need to be exactly in the right place to see that total eclipse. So everyone on the night side of Earth can see it. Alright. Well, you might be thinking, why don't we have an eclipse every single month? Because remember, the moon orbits around the Earth. So here's the moon, it orbits around the Earth. Why don't we have a solar eclipse every single time the moon's here? And why don't we have a lunar eclipse every time the moon is further away and in shadow? Well, the reason for that, scientists discovered, is that the moon's orbit actually isn't horizontal. And so it's tilted. So the moon's orbit, it's actually tilted by about 5 degrees. In other words, it's not horizontal. So that means if you can picture the moon moving around the Earth, if the sun, let's just draw the sun small, for the moon to line up to have an eclipse, the moon has to be exactly at this point here, so that it's exactly level with the Earth and the sun. And there's also a point behind the Earth as well in the orbit, where the moon will line up with the sun and the Earth. But every other point during the month, the moon's either above the Earth, up here, or it's below the Earth, down there. So there's no way that it can line up for an eclipse to happen. So that's why eclipses don't happen very often. And scientists can calculate when they happen. So for lunar eclipses, we actually get about 3 a year. And you can look at the calendars, you can research to be up at the right time to see them. Solar eclipses, they're the rare one. So everything needs to line up perfectly for a solar eclipse. And each place in the world rarely gets to see them. So if we're thinking of one particular place like Melbourne, we only get to see a solar eclipse once every 375 years. So each location only sees one every 375 years. Different locations around the world will have a solar eclipse a bit more regularly. but you'll need to travel around if you want to see a solar eclipse. Okay, so that's how the two types of eclipses actually work.